Hello Steelers, and welcome to this review of General d'Armée 2, second version of it, by David Brown and Christopher Brown, published by Wrights Press, which is the sister company of Too Fat Lardies. Now, when this was actually first released, and I think it was early 2024, I actually did a flip through of the book itself. So if you're interested in seeing a little bit more about the detail of the book itself, go and check that video out. Because what I'm going to do in this video as a review, I haven't actually done a review of it because at the time I'd not played it, but since then I've played quite a few games of it, really enjoyed it. So I thought it's about time that I actually stepped up and I talked about it, what I liked about it. One or two things I'm probably not so hot on, but there's not many of those. But I thought I'll do a proper review of it. We'll have a look at it from an in-depth point of view. So I'm going to kind of hone in quite a lot more on some of the aspects that I really like about this game rather than just doing a general overview of it. As I say, there is that flip through that I've already done on the channel anyway. So go and check that out, and that will give you an idea of how it looks. And speaking of how it looks, I mean, first of all, this is one of the, I suppose, new generation of Too Fat Lardies games. It's Wrights Press, but it still kind of all goes through Rich Clark, and this looks absolutely beautiful. I just want to say that it is a real pleasure to read. It's the font is the right size. It looks good. It's an easy read. There's lots of lovely colour pictures in it. You'll see that as we're going through it anyway. There's lots and lots of example pictures as well for the various bits and pieces. It's broken up, some of the different charts and things are put clearly. There's also lots of clear examples in it, and also scattered throughout as well are these things: the Musing of the Marshal, which is basically design notes for particular parts of the rules. So it looks lovely from that point of view. And one of the things I wanted to mention in particular is, from the look of it, is that I've got this. This is the book version of it, which you can just buy through Too Fat Lardies website. You can, if you buy the PDF and get it printed at a third-party printer, the actual font on it. And I don't know if this is by design or just a happy accident, but with lots of Too Fat Lardies stuff anyway, if you actually print it at A5 size so you can have a smaller book, it's still very clear to read. So that's a really nice little feature in there. There's a little bit of thought that's gone into how people are consuming these products. So if you just want to buy the PDF and just get it printed or print it yourself, you can do it on a much smaller paper than the actual book itself. But I would suggest getting the book itself. It is worth it. And buying it, of course, direct from the printers themselves, or from Too Fat Lardies themselves. It also comes with two play sheets as well, which once you are familiar with the rules, and this is something this is quite nice, you can actually pretty much play the entire game just from these two sheets if you want, with occasional looks to the book itself just to clarify various things. I played recently and I found that throughout the game, and I was playing for several hours because I was filming it as well, I only had to refer to the book on some very specific questions. Most of the information was all on here once you read through it. And again, just to say as well, it is really clearly written. It is really concise in its writing. The book itself is laid out in a very interesting and logical way as well. It works its way through, tells you exactly what you need for the game, works through the different types of battles that you want to play with this, how to deploy, how to do the game turn, your aide-de-camps that you're going to come up with, your brigade commands, and then works its way through the different aspects of a typical turn as well. So you can go straight to that. The other thing as well I will mention in here, while I'm talking here, is we have two scenarios, Albura and also Ekmul, both as starter scenarios, which can just get you straight onto the table if you've got all the bits and pieces to play. And it also, as it should do, has a good 2-page index. And the good thing about this index in particular is that not only does it give you every instance where the thing is what you're looking for actually occurs in the rules, but it also, in bold type, it actually tells you as well that's where the specific rule is. So for example, skirmishers tasking is on pages 26 and 64, but the actual rules pertaining to it is page 26, because that's in bold, whereas 64 is just a mention of it, for example. So really nice way of just being able to dive straight back into the rules and find exactly what you're looking for from that index. And that again is always appreciated. Any rules writers out there that are that are watching this, thinking about it, always include an index. Now, as I say, I really like these set of rules. I've kind of been looking, I had been looking, I started about 18 months ago looking for battalion level Napoleonic rules, and these just came out around the same right time, so I was kind of looking at these as a way of getting into that level of Napoleonic gaming. I've got stuff with Blucher, which is brigade level. I've also got sharp practice, which is obviously skirmish level as well. This sits somewhere squarely in between those two. You can take it up to divisional levels if you want to, and also up to core. Well, the basic game is a divisional level. You can take it straight up to a core battle as well if you want to, by adding multiplayers and just really adding more and more units. You can make this as big as you want, so it is a real big battle game. Right, that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a look very specifically at some of the parts of this that I quite like in here, so we can talk a little bit about how the mechanics of the game work and how various bits and pieces of it come together. So I'll get the camera set up, we'll change around and we'll have a look at it in a little bit more in depth. Well, let's dive straight in. As I say, lovely cover, lovely back there. Just to give you a quick flick through close up there, as I say, you can see there is quite a lot of lovely images in here. Some of these I think come from the Perrys. There's various other people. These are all acknowledged in the front of it here. So we've got, yeah, Alan and Michael Perry, got Jim Ibbotson, Andy Tomlinson and Doug Burney as well. So some lovely pictures in here. Right, what I want to do is, as I say, this is your contents. Gives you a good idea of what is actually in the book itself, and also the breakdown of each turn just by looking at this, really. And what I want to do is just kind of dive in here a little bit and just have a look at some of these close up and just talk a little bit about what I like specifically in this set of rules. And number one is going to be the aide-de-camps. This is chapter 6, so we're going to jump straight into here and we're going to talk about the aide-de-camp and the mechanics are based around that. So the aide-de-camp mechanic really is basically, it's an orders section. It's similar to orders in O Group, if anybody who's watching that has played this, which is another favourite game of mine. However, the aide-de-camps are a little bit more specific than they are in O Group. And the way this works is basically at the start of your turn you roll, depending on how big your brigades are, how many units you have in your army, and you will have multiple brigades. You roll a certain number of dice. And it could be anywhere between about 2 or 6, depending on how many you have. For every dice that you roll, if you roll a 1 or a 2, you do not get an ADC. But everything you roll a 3 up, you get an ADC. So you got 2/3 chance of gaining an ADC on each of those dice. Let's say you're rolling 4 dice on average. There's a good chance you will probably get 2 or 3 ADCs for that turn. Now, what you do is then there's also a little extra rule. If you roll the double 6 at any point in that roll, you will also get an extra ADC. So you could potentially get 1 extra on top of the ones you already have as well, which is quite nice as well. And there's a couple of other little bits and pieces here as well to get ADCs. There's some extra little rules like having adjutants and things. You may be able to get a re-roll on some of the rolls that failed. So there's all these little extra rules just to really add a little bit of flavour to the different armies and things. Now, what do ADCs do? And this is the question. And this is where the game really shines, because not only do you have to see if your units are hesitant, but you also have these choices as well on top of that, and these are the aide de camp. This is the choices that you're going to make for your various actions throughout your turn. You've got a lot of basic actions. You will test if your brigades are hesitant or not, and it's the same rule as an ADC. So a 1 or a 2, they are hesitant and they can't really do much apart from firing and a little bit of reforming, that kind of stuff. If you get a 3 up, then they can do whatever they want, within reason. So that's moving, firing, charging, that kind of thing. However, you can then add on these aide de camp onto your units, but you do the aide de camps before you found out if they're hesitant or not. So you're not entirely sure if the unit is going to be hesitant or not before you've added your aide de camp. Send them off and basically see if they reach the destination. So you give an ADC a tasking, and the tasking is translated into how many ADCs it actually costs. For most of them, it is only the cost of 1, but they give you these little extra bonuses or little actions within that turn that you're taking. So let me give you an example here. So for example, you can have a brigade attachment. It costs you 1 ADC, and it allows you to re-roll a failed faltered brigade dice if you want it. So if you really want that brigade to do something, you give them that extra brigade attachment. It uses up one of your ADCs, but it means there's a very good chance that that brigade is going to activate that turn. Things like you can bring on reserves using an ADC here. You can redeploy, so that means you can move a brigade to a different part of the battlefield. Because you should have brigade areas for each of your brigades. That probably is more useful in a core game, for example, because if you're only playing a small game with only 3 brigades in it, you probably only get 3 areas anyway. You're probably not going to want to shift them about too much, but in a core battle you'll probably be wanting to move brigades up and down that line. There's also some other bits and pieces as well. You can add in forwards, for example, costs of 2 ADCs. You can add an artillery assault, which just makes your artillery better when it fires, but that is a cost of 2 ADCs. You can add skirmishes in. It just means that the skirmishers have a little bit of a bonus when they come to fire. And also, this is an interesting one, is the infantry assault. It only costs you 1 ADC, but what it means is it allows an infantry to charge and also drag in some supports with it. Infantry battalions can charge on their own, but to have support they're going to need to play the infantry assault. So for example, you say you have 2 ADCs, you might think, right, I want to charge with a battalion, so I'm going to spend 1 ADC on my infantry assault, but I want to make sure that that battalion is going to be part of a brigade that is actually able to move, so I then spend another ADC on my brigade attachment. So that means basically I get a re-roll to see if it's hesitant or not if I fail it, and then I also get to drag in some supports when my unit charges. Now these are things that you're going to be doing throughout your game, and this is where the choice lies. This is where the game itself is not particularly complex, but it's the decisions that are made that are complex, and this is where it comes in with the taskings. Where do you spend your ADCs? Where do you force those points of impact, and where do these ADCs go to make it where is the most impact going to be when you actually play these? So this is where the complexity of choice comes in, and this is why I really like. That's the command level that you're thinking about when you're thinking about you spending these ADCs. They are finite resources. You will get some of them back in the next turn. You might not get as many as you've got, but you will certainly get some of them back, and it is just where do these go on the battlefield at the time. The other thing you have as well is the CNC command. You generally only have a couple of these for the entire game though, and you can only spend these every so often. Now these ones are covered over here, so these cost a certain amount of ADCs. Well, they all cost 2 actually, but they are specific, again, actions, but they supersede everything else. So there's some really nice ones in here, and this is really when the impact of the game comes in, and really where you should be thinking about, I need to spend my CNC command right now because I know this, this attacking cavalry unit if I give it post of honor, it will go in for an attack. It will get, a better charge bonus. It will also, increase its casualties potentially on the enemy, and get elan, all these kind of things. So you're adding to it, but you can only use a couple of these throughout the game itself. So for example, let's have a look. Like this is one I just talked about here. Post of honor costs you 2 ADCs. You attach the CNC, your commander-in-chief, to a brigade that's not faltering for this turn. It automatically obeys orders with no command roll, so it's already going to do the things it does. You can re-roll one of your final 2 initiative dice, so you may snatch initiative from the enemy, which is quite nice, but that's only in the big divisional battles. You apply glory, which allows you 2 extra casualty dice when you go into combat, rather than the usual 1. So normally a glory, which is a basic one over here in ADC tasking, it can give you an extra casualty dice. This gives you 2. It also, any discipline test gives you a promotion as well, so it makes it harder for you to fail that discipline test if it comes up. When you're charging, you also record, the lead unit recovers a casualty and also must charge. So basically it's pushing that unit into the attack. And then they also gain the forwards bonus, or the lead unit may gain 1 charge reroll. That becomes a bit more clear in the actual charging itself. But it's basically you are going from literally potentially adding 1 extra casualty dice for glory to all those extra things, but it's costing you 2, and you can only do it once in the game or twice in the game, depending on how many commander-in-chief commands you actually got as well. So moving from the ADCs, which I think is a really, really nice little aspect of the rules, as I say, it's that, the complexity of decision rather than complexity of rules. I just think it's really clever. They're all pretty simple, just to stick them down. Most of them you will remember after the first couple of turns, because there'll be some that you'll be reusing all the time. What I want to talk about here is the game turn itself. Now, I'm not a massive fan of, some people probably know this if you've been watching my videos, I'm not a huge fan of fixed turn for phases, or fixed phases within a turn. There's quite a lot of games that do use them. I can understand why it's used in this, because if you're using, this is General Dame is it doesn't say specifically, but I think it's really about those big divisional battles, and it's a much easier way to control players when you've got multiple players on either side, if you have those fixed phases, because you can say, right, we're at this phase, next phase, next phase, next phase, so everybody knows where they are within the game turn, rather than in some skirmish games people just doing different things at different times. So I can see where it stands, and to be honest, it flows pretty quickly as well. I didn't really notice it when I was playing the game, because you're just moving through these different phases very quickly. But what I do like is the way that they are actually broken up, and the reason for this is because you start with your commanding initiative. So this is where you get your ADCs, this is where you roll to see how many units are faltering. It's also a roll way to see who gets the initiative. Whoever gets the most faltering units adds an extra dice to their normal 2 dice of initiative, and what you do is then choose the lowest 2 dice as your score for the initiative. So obviously the more dice you're rolling, the more chance you have of rolling pretty low, and I think that's again a really nice little mechanic that doesn't shout too much about itself, but it's in there, and it just works really, really well as a very simple way of just tipping the balance when it comes to initiative on either side. And it's just down to how many faltering units you've got, how many hesitant units you've got, and a few other factors as well. And that's really interesting. And then you go into command initiative, but within each game turn, you actually take, whoever takes the initiative is the phasing player, and then they swap sides. So phasing player and non-phasing player, basically. But you don't play through the full turn on your turn and then swap over to the enemy. You basically move between them. So the phasing player does their charges, then the non-phaser, then the phasing player does the movement, then the non-phasing, etc., etc. Charges are interesting because you have to declare them at the start of your turn. So basically it already locks you into that attack from the start. And I mentioned this before with the ADCs, where you can actually in some cases drag in extra supports as well as part of that charge. But in this case from this point of view, basically, the phasing player declares their charges, so it means that the opposing player has to stand them, or then charge where else, possibly not where they wanted to, but wherever opportunity arises. And then movement as well is also broken into two phases. You have tactical movement, which is anybody who hasn't charged or been charged or is being used as a support. Then you will move any unit that's on the table, and then after that you actually get your reserves move. So basically everybody's moved already before the reserves turn up. So you're not entirely sure where they're going to be when they do appear on the table. So it kind of puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage if your enemy is just about to bring on the reserves. It's like, do I move over here, because their reserves may end up over here as well. And then you move through the different firing. And the firing, once again, is broken into three phases. You start with the skirmishers, because obviously they're just guys on their own with a musket, just loading and firing as they need to. Then we go on to artillery, which again, because it's a smallish group of guns firing, they're obviously firing quite fast, and they're not firing. Most artillery in the Napoleonic period is not firing at the same time. They are just firing as part of a battery, but they are firing with delays between them, and they will just carry on firing. And then finally you go on to volley fire, which obviously that means you've got to have disciplined units, or the officer telling everybody when to load and fire, so it's obviously a little bit slower. So again, you move through all of those different phases. It goes the phasing player, the non-phasing player, and then you finally finish up with combat, which is basically linked to your chargers. So if they've stood and fought, then you move on to the combat. Otherwise, your chargers may have already broken those units that they've attacked. So what am I saying here is basically that it is it is a fixed phase turn within the game, but I think it works really well just because of what it offers within that fixed phase, and the fact that you are going to have that choice when it comes to the initiative. You can either be if you win the initiative, you can either be the phasing player or the non-phasing, and it might be that you want to be the non-phasing player. So you might just might want to hold back and see what the enemy does in that turn, which is perfectly legitimate. But it could change each turn, or it could stay the same. So again, it's quite nice the way that it just works through like that. I mean, I do live for the day where we get to see a big battle Napoleonic game where there isn't a fixed turn in it. But I think some of those days are probably quite far off at this point. But even so, this is still good, and I still do like it. Okay, I mentioned them quite briefly, but charges are another aspect of the rules that I like, and this is one of the first things that you're going to do in your turn once you've found out who's got the initiative, where you place your ADCs. I mentioned it before, if you're infantry and you want to have some support when you're attacking with your charge, which you probably will do, you have to have that infantry assault. Cavalry can just charge without it, but infantry have to go in with an infantry assault, otherwise they will just go in on their own, which is not what you want. What is nice with this is, as I say, it's all about supporting units. And we've got a nice diagram here just to show you how they support. And you either have flank supports or rear supports, or both of them really. And the more that you add in gives you either, depending on how you want to play them, you can either fire with them as the charging unit goes in, or they can be used to re-roll the dice in the charge itself. So again, it's another choice, and it's that complexity of choice which just really gives it that little bit of an edge when it comes to other games where you just basically pile in. The way that you do it is you basically resolve the charge by rolling 2 dice each. If you are disciplined, if you're shaken or disordered, which is various different methods, different states your unit could be in, you'll roll more dice. So for example, if you're shaken, you roll 3d6 and you use 2 lower scores. So once again, it's that really nice little mechanic of just rolling more dice but choosing the lower ones. Then you also perhaps have some of these advantages as well, which may allow you re-rolls or that kind of thing, or add more dice to your to the charge roll itself. And again, you know, picking the higher numbers or the lower numbers depending on which. And then you finally look at the results of the charge, and it depends if it's infantry v infantry or artillery, cavalry v cavalry, or cavalry v infantry and artillery. And there's a difference between somewhere between a draw and either +6 or -6 or worse. And this is the important bit, because this is where it depends really if your units are going to go into combat. So the +6 refers to the attacker, so it's in favour of the attacker basically. So for example, infantry versus infantry, if you roll 6 more than your defender, you as the attacker will get a victory. The defender will retreat and they will take 6 dice of casualties. Casualties are caused by rolling a dice and getting a 4 up, and their supports will also retreat and they will get the 4 dice of casualties as well. So for every 4 up you would take a casualty. Most battalions will take 12 casualties before they're dispersed. They will take up to 6 casualties before they are worn. And then you also have, you know, these are the defined results. So you may take the ground and the defender retreats. You may close to combat if you're only 1 or 2 higher than them, and they will become unformed as the enemy. And pretty much it's quite similar, but obviously a negative effect for the minuses. So for the attacker, if you get a -1 or 2, they halt and they just lead and volley, but they become unformed. The defender will stand. The attacker may withdraw with a casualty. The defender stands, or the attacker is broken, so they will disappear as well off the tip. But again, all these results are defined. So potentially you may not even close to combat as part of this charge. You might even destroy your enemy before you've even started, which is just a nice way of doing it. You know, it's not every single charge ended up in hand-to-hand combat, especially if you're up against, you know, a poorer enemy or a broken enemy or a shaken enemy, for example. So this is, you know, just a nice way of clearing units off or forcing them back as well. And they then obviously, once they start to retreat, they also have an effect on the brigade's morale as well, which might make the brigade falter, you know, all these kind of things, which then will affect the rest of the brigade and also eventually the rest of your army as well, and lead to either victory or hopefully defeat for the enemy. Let's have a little talk about firing just in general, really, because this is again there's some nice mechanics in here as well. So basically, infantry, they generally fire as a volley. You have 3 types of volley that they will fire. A standard volley, which is your usual disciplined, you know, trained unit will fire a standard volley. And you have an inferior volley, which obviously is a little bit worse, and then you also have a weak volley as well, which is the worst of the worst. So you basically got 3 levels of volleying. The way you work these out is really down to the modifiers that you have over here. So for example, if the firer has 6 or more casualties out of their 12, then that's an inferior volley modifier. If you have a couple of these, then you become a weak volley fire, and that just drops you down to 1 single casualty dice. So for example, let's see, a firer on 6 or more casualties, and if they are also unformed, would be 2 inferior modifiers, meaning that they would only fire a weak volley, which means they roll a d6, and if they get a 4 or above, they've caused a casualty. However, unfortunately for them, if they also roll a 1, they lose a fire discipline as well. It basically means that they can't really do a huge amount with that fire discipline, but once they've lost that fire discipline, until they regain it again, so it kind of just stops them doing things. But the way it works is, you basically roll 2 dice for your volley, 2d6, and depending on the score, is, you know, basically what you are going to get for your for the outcome. So it's anywhere between loss of fire discipline on a 4 or less, up to 4 casualties plus a discipline test on the enemy. Discipline tests are your basic morale tests. You will roll those depending on the level of troop it is that you are firing at or that's taking the test. And obviously you've got standard volley, your inferior volley, and the weak volley is just down here. But these are just ever so slightly different. Obviously an inferior volley is going to be worse. It's going to give you a worse outcome than a standard volley. And you've also got, you know, if you've actually moved as well, it's going to be worse as well. So your standard volley could give you a maximum of 4 casualties on the discipline test. Your inferior volley is going to give you a maximum of 3 casualties in a discipline test. Now these are quite easy numbers to remember, even in the game. I mean, you might have to look at this chart a few times, but for most of it, it's pretty obvious. So, you know, a 7 is going to be your average roll. So it's basically 2 hits on a standard volley or 1 hit on the inferior volley. The rest of it kind of falls into those kind of brackets, so it's quite simple, you know. So let's just look at it. Standard volley, for example, if you roll a 5 or a 6, you only take hitting 1. 7 or 8, you're hitting 2. 9 up, well, 9 to 10, but 9 on its own is 3 and a discipline test, and also 3 and a discipline test if you moved, or 4 if you haven't moved. So it's quite a simple little system. However, the interesting part of it is infantry modifiers don't actually affect the casualty table. What they do affect is casualty dice, and you add these in extra as a different colour dice to the 2 dice that you've rolled on your casualty table. So for example, if you are elite, or if you're veteran in line or drilled in line, you get an extra casualty dice for your firing. So you will roll your 2 dice for your fire, your infantry fire, and you will also roll a casualty dice. Casualty dice will also cause another casualty on a roll of a 4 up. So potentially, over here, let's say you've got 2 extra casualty dice, you might score a 10 on your volley fire, so you're causing 4 damage, plus 4 hits, plus a discipline test, and your casualty dice both come up with a 4 up, so you're actually causing 6 hits and a discipline test on top of it. Again, a really nice little way of doing things without having to do too much calculation in your head, and most of this stuff is pretty simple as well. So targets in square, you get a casualty dice. Target is charging column. The large unit in line with no movement, for example, you know. So there's these kind of really simple little additions that you just have to throw in, and it works very similar as well with artillery as well, which is just kind of done along the same rule. So here are the artillery modifiers. Once again, it's either standard, inferior or weak fire, and it really depends on just how many of those inferior fire modifiers you have. And also you get to add casualty dice to your artillery as well. So if you're using assault fire, you get an extra +2 on your casualty dice as well. So it's a really nice simple way of just moving through those casualty lists without having to think too much about it during the game and having to take your mind away from what's actually happening on the tabletop itself. So there you go, folks. That's kind of my review of General d'Armée 2. Now I've had a time to not only read the rules quite a few times, but I've also had the time to sit down and play it quite a few times as well. I haven't had a bad game of this yet. Apart from the very first one that I played, but that was probably more down to external factors than the game itself. But in general, this is a very, very good set of Napoleonic rules. It's a little bit more, shall we say, cerebral than some other big battle Napoleonic game rules that are out there, I think, but you know, it's the kind of thing that I'm looking for. There's quite a lot of granularity in it. There's a lot of choice in it. There is, as I say, the fact that you have to, you've got to think about where you're going to be placing those ADCs, and that is really going to affect your game turn. That, I think, is the that's where the complexity of the game comes in. The rest of it looks complex, and it may look complex from having gone through this itself. It really, honestly, it isn't. You will pick it up within a couple of turns of playing, especially if you've got somebody who knows how to play it as well, who can walk you through it. But it is quite a simple game once you get to the grips with the basic concepts of it, and the basic concepts are pretty simple as well down there. It's really well worth investing some of your time in, especially if you've got a large Napoleonic collection. I'd really, it comes Storm of Steel recommended. 2 thumbs up. There you go, 2 thumbs up for General d'Armée. I think it is a fantastic set of rules, and I think I can't wait to play the next game of it, to be perfectly honest. Right. If you have enjoyed this video, there are plenty of others on the channel. I've got some battle reports for General d'Armée 2. There's probably should be at least 2 on the channel by the time this video comes out, so go and check those out. As I say, I did a flip through of the game itself, the rules when they first came through anyway, and if you have enjoyed this and you want to see more General Dame 2 on the channel, which I'm sure I can oblige you with, let me know in the comments. I will leave it at that and just say, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next Storm of Steel video.